Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So thank you for the introduction. Uh, so welcome everybody to our third session. We're going to be talking about forgiveness. And I thought today we would start by way of a story from Thailand. And so in this is a story about Ajahn Lee, who's a famous teacher. The English speakers probably know. I'm not sure if he's famous because a lot of the books haven't been translated to Chinese yet. So he was what they call a Tudong monk in Thailand, and we would call that a Charika monk in Sri Lanka. So this kind of a monk normally doesn't always stay in one spot. They would travel by foot from place to place for a large part of the year. So on this particular occasion, Ajahn Lee had decided to spend his Vasa in the northeast of Thailand, spending the Vasa there at a small monastery with a group of disciples. And after the Vasa, he heard that his father had fallen ill, and so he had made a plan to go back to visit him. Just around that time, he was making plans to leave. One evening, he was going out to do some teaching in the village, going out to teach meditation. And just as he was getting ready to leave the monastery, a group of about 100 squirrels rushed into the monastery. And not only that, they settled on the porch of a monk named Yen, Bante Yen. And Ajahn Lee saw this and he was a bit shaken. He thought, this is a bad sign, something odd is going to happen. So he gathered all the monks and he told them, look, please don't do anything tonight. Just go back to your kuti. If you have any business, you can do it another day. Just go back to your kuti. Don't talk to anybody. Meditate alone. And tomorrow we'll talk over, see if anything's happened. And after that, he went out and held his meditation session. Middle of the meditation session, two villagers rushed into the room. And they rushed in but seeing that everybody was meditating, they sat to one side and waited for the whole session to finish. And then they informed Ajahn Lee that Bante Yen had been stabbed. But fortunately, it wasn't too serious. And when they got back to the monastery, they found that pretty much right away, the police had found the suspect, a man named Na Yin. He's a local guy and his friend. When the police interrogated them, they found they wouldn't confess, but they were pretty sure these are the two guys behind it, so they decided to lock them up anyway. Ajahn Lee was he knew this guy, and he knew he was a bit of a hooligan, but he didn't think he was rotten through and through, and so he asked the police chief if he could talk with him, if the three of them could meet together. So they had a meeting. And so I'm going to quote from Ajahn Tanisro's translation of Ajahn Lee's autobiography here. If it's true that you're involved in this, I don't want you ever to do it again. No matter whether it's a case of a monk or a layperson, I want you to stop. If it's not true that you're guilty, then it means you're a good person. So today I'm going to ask the chief of police to give me Na Yin. From today onwards, I'll ask Na Yin not to cause the monastery any trouble. May the chief of police please let Na Yin go so that there'll be no more animosity between us. So we've been talking about how to overcome anger in our previous talk. And also in our first talk, we talked about right effort. Today we're talking about forgiveness. And so we have an example in our story just now. And I'm going to give an example from the Samyutta Nikaya. I think I'll start with reading the sutta from the Samyutta Nikaya. We have a translation here by Bhikkhu Bodhi. It's the Samyutta Nikaya. It's from the Sagata Vagga again. That's the first section of the Samyutta Nikaya. And it's the 35th sutta, so 135. In this sutta, it actually has two sections. In the first section, a group of devas come and they chant some verses to the Buddha. And after that, the Buddha corrects what they've said. For following on that, the Devas apologize to the Buddha, and the Buddha smiles. So when they see him smile, they become upset and they think he's making fun of them or something. Then they chant another set of verses, which the Buddha responds to. So it's the second set of verses that we're going to hear now. If one does not grant pardon to those who confess transgression, angry at heart, intent on hate, one strongly harbors enmity. And the Buddha responds, if there was no transgression, if here there was no going astray, and if enmities were appeased, then one would be faultless here. And the Devata responds, for whom are there no transgressions? For whom is there no going astray? Who has not fallen into confusion? And who is the wise one ever mindful? And the Buddha responds, the Tathagata, the enlightened one, full of compassion for all beings. For him there are no transgressions. For him there is no going astray. He has not fallen into confusion, and he is the wise one, ever mindful. If one does not grant pardon to those who confess transgression, angry at heart, intent on hate, one strongly harbors enmity. In that enmity I do not delight. Thus I pardon your transgression. So when somebody, in the suttas, when somebody goes and they ask forgiveness from the Buddha, usually the Buddha responds with a particular verse, where they would call it a pericope. So the Buddha would say, yes, it's true that you have done something wrong, but in this sasana, it counts as a sign of progress if you're able to admit your faults, and then he would accept their forgiveness. So in the Vinaya, if somebody comes to a monk, especially if one monk comes to another monk, they're required to give forgiveness to them. It's actually an offense if you don't forgive. But this forgiveness, it doesn't mean completely forgetting what happened. It means that you don't bring up the matter again and again. You don't criticize the person. You don't seek revenge. But it doesn't mean that your relationship with that person hasn't changed. And you remember what's happened. And you may have to act accordingly. Sometimes if somebody is an angry person or unreliable, then you might not be able to work with them in the future. So in Ajahn Lee's story, the situation is a little different because Ajahn Lee has come and he has decided to help out Na Ying. But Na Ying didn't confess his mistake. So he had been hired by the village monks to stab another monk. He had actually committed this, what we would call aggravated assault in some countries these days. And Ajahn Lee asked the police chief to let him go because he saw something in the character. He thought that this individual has a chance to change. So because of this, they have he's forgiven him and he has let him go. He's not actually obligated to do that. If he had just let the police put him in jail, that also would have been completely correct. So we don't know what would have been the best way, but it seems that Na Ying he changed. He became a devoted follower of Ajahn Lee in the future. And so because of that, we can see maybe Ajahn Lee did make the right decision. So sometimes forgiveness is hardest when it comes to reflecting on our own actions. And I picked out one story, very famous story from the Dhammapada, from Dhammapada 182 in this regard. And I think most of you have heard the story before. And this is the story of Erakapata Mahanaga. So in a past life, in the time of Kassapa Buddha, Erakapata was a monk, a young monk. And one day he was traveling along the Ganges River, and he extended his hand and he grasped a reed at the riverbank. And now the boat was moving swiftly, but he didn't let go of the reed, and it broke off. Now, this is a small thing, but according to the monks' rules and the nuns' rules, we're not allowed to damage plants. It's what we call a pachitya offense. This sort of thing, if you do this sort of thing, you're required to discuss it and confess it to another monk, or for the nuns, in the case of the nuns, another nun. However, Erakapata was a young monk, And so he didn't do that. So he continued his meditation for a very long time. And eventually, as his life was coming to an end, he started to remember this event again and again. He started to obsess over it. And he realized that he had done this thing. It was wrong, but he didn't confess it. And as his life reached its end, that was the thought that led to his new birth, which was as this Naga, Herakapata. So Nagas are something like dragons, you can say. For those of you who don't really know about Nagas, they have some special powers. They're able to change form from snake form into human form, which is one of their primary powers. And they have some other psychic powers as well. In their human form, they're considered to be very beautiful. However, due to the nature of their rebirth, they're not able to make progress in their meditation. And so Erakapato was quite upset about this. And at that point, he didn't know what to do. He had been reborn in the Ganges. Not only that, the lifespan of a Naga is quite long. So he decided when the next Buddha were to arise in the world, he would want to meet him and get some advice. After a long time, he had a daughter. And when his daughter grew up to her teenage years, he realized he drew up a plan. And the plan was to give her a riddle that only a Buddha could solve. And anybody who would be able to answer that riddle could have her hand in marriage. So he set up a contest. Once a month, his daughter would dance on the banks of the Ganges River, and all the men would come and they would try to give an answer to this riddle. And now, for a long time, no one was able to answer it until one day, a young Brahmin named Uttara, he was heading to the banks of the Ganges, and he met the Buddha. And the Buddha pulled him aside and asked him what he was doing. He explained, "I'm going to see the dancing Naga woman." And the Buddha asked what kind of answer he was planning to give to her question, and he explained what it was. And the Buddha said, "No, I don't think she'll like that answer. Please give her this answer. If you give her this answer, then I think you'll win the prize." When he heard these verses, he was able to attain stream entry. So I have the verses. We didn't prepare them in Chinese, but maybe for the English, I'll chant the verses very quickly. There are two sets of verses that he chants. We won't discuss the meaning of the verses. King Suradapati Raja, King Suraja Rajisaro, Katang Suvirajo Hoti, Katang Baloti Vuchati. What type of ruler is the king? What king is it ruled by passion? How may he become passionless? Who is called a foolish person? Chedvara Dipati Raja Rajamano Rajisaro Arajang Virajo Hoti Rajang Baloti Vuchati. He who rules over the 6 doors is king. When attached, the king is ruled by passion. Being unattached, he is passionless. Attached, he is called a foolish person. So after giving that answer, the Naga maiden came up with another verse. Kena suvayati balo katang nudati pandito yongak kemi katang hoti tang me yakha hipuchitoti. By what is a fool swept away? How does a wise man drive away? How is there release from the yokes? Speak to me, answer my question. Ogena vayati balo yoga nudati pandito sambayoga visangyuto yoga kimiti vuchati. By the deluge is a fool swept away. By effort does a man drive away. Being unfettered from all the yokes, he is said to be released from the yokes. Translation by Bhante Ananda Jyoti and the scholar Burlingame. So we won't discuss the meaning of the verses today. If we get a chance in the future, we can discuss them. They have some technical meanings there. So The Brahmanuttara attained stream entry, and the Naga Erakapata, of course, he's not able to do that in this lifetime, in that lifetime, but he was able to meet the Buddha as a means of his plan. So I think from his story we can learn a few things, and one of them is, the first one is simply the reality that people have this nature to do something small that they shouldn't have done. And at first they have this feeling it doesn't mean much, but after a long time they slowly grows in their mind, grows in importance in their mind, and they have this kind of regret that has to be overcome. So the second thing that it brings up is when you're in a bad situation like Erakapata Naga, then you have to use what resources you have to overcome your difficulties. So he came up with a very clever plan. He was able to meet the Buddha, and although he was not able to attain path and fruition in that life, I think he's so determined we can imagine he would eventually be able to attain that. I missed one in the English. I missed one section. So Bhikkhu Bodhi gives the Abhidhamma definition of this remorse, kukuccha, in his comprehensive manual of Abhidhamma. So it's the translation of the Abhidhammata Sangaha. Kukuccha is worry or remorse after having done wrong. Its characteristic is a subsequent regret. Its function is to sorrow over what has and has not been done. It is manifested as remorse. Its proximate cause is what has and has not been done. So we've come to a section about how to overcome these things, overcome this remorse. And one of the examples, mostly the examples that we can find in the suttas, are aimed towards monks or nuns. And so this particular sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, in the 5, sutta number 142, describes 5 sorts of people and how they should progress if they've done something wrong. And it's interesting. So the Buddha gives the fifth person. The fifth person is the idea of the fifth person is somebody who doesn't do anything wrong and they attain Nibbana. So the goal of the other 4 is to attain Nibbana. But you have the situation where one person does something wrong and they admit the wrong. One person does something wrong and they don't admit it. Another person doesn't do anything wrong, but they're still obsessed with it. They still feel this kind of remorse. So maybe a quote from part of the sutta here is Ajahn Sujato's translation. I won't read the whole thing. Mendicants. These 5 people are found in the world. What 5? One person transgresses and regrets it, and they don't truly understand the freedom of heart and freedom of wisdom, but where those arisen, bad, unskillful qualities cease without anything left over. One person transgresses and doesn't regret it, and then they don't attain Nibbana. One person doesn't transgress and yet still feels regret, so they didn't do anything wrong, and they don't understand and realize Nibbana. One person does neither, so they don't do anything wrong and they don't regret that, but they're also not able to attain Nibbana. And so after that, after outlining the cases, the Buddha gives some advice how they should act in each case. So in the case where somebody's done something wrong, then they need to deal with that in according to the Vinaya. So earlier in the story of Erakapata, that particular monk, he just needed to confess what he had done. But there are some other kinds of offenses that are more serious. They might require some kind of further action to repair the mistake. Adapting to lay life, then in some cases, if you've done something wrong, no action is required. In other cases, you may need to ask forgiveness from somebody. And in another case, you may need to make recompense to somebody. Either way, the fault should be dealt with. And then you can continue with your meditation practice. In the case where somebody has not actually done something wrong, but they're still really worried about it, they need to be reassured. So especially for those who are for the monks and nuns, the Vinaya rules can be very complicated. They can easily get some kind of doubt about whether they have committed an offense or not. And so this sort of situation is more common with those individuals. And there's actually a section later in the talk, the Buddha gives 6 ways of dealing with regret. That very much applies here. So we need quite a few tools in our toolkit if we want to overcome regret. So one of them is to practice Buddhanussati. So once we try to deal with something, but we still have some regret in our mind, we can try practicing Buddhanussati, reflecting on the Buddha, all of the difficulties that he went through in his practice, but in the end, he was able to overcome all suffering. So for some people, especially from a traditional Buddhist background, this can be very helpful. For other people, it might be more helpful to reflect on the workings of Kamma. So let's have a look at Lonapala Sutta, very famous sutta on this topic. This excerpt is from Ajahn Thanissaro translation. It is in the threes of the Anguttara Nikaya. It's sutta number 100. Suppose that a man were to drop a salt crystal into a small amount of water in a cup. What do you think? Would the water in the cup become salty because of the salt crystal and unfit to drink? Yes, Lord. Why is that? There being only a small amount of water in the cup, it would become salty because of the salt crystal and unfit to drink. Now suppose that a man were to drop a salt crystal into the Ganges River. What do you think? Would the water in the river Ganges become salty because of the salt crystal and unfit to drink? No, Lord. Why is that? There being a great mass of water in the river Ganges, it would not become salty because of the salt crystal or unfit to drink. In the same way, there is the case where a trifling evil deed done by one individual takes him to hell, and there is the case where the very same sort of trifling deed done by another individual is experienced in the here and now, and for the most part barely appears for a moment. Now a trifling evil act done by what sort of individual takes him to hell? There is the case where a certain individual is undeveloped in body, undeveloped in virtue, undeveloped in mind, undeveloped in discernment, restricted, small-hearted, dwelling with suffering. A trifling act done by this sort of individual takes him to hell. Now, a trifling evil act done by what sort of individual is experienced in the here and now, and for the most part barely appears for a moment. There is the case where a certain individual is developed in body, developed in virtue, developed in mind, developed in discernment, unrestricted, large-hearted, dwelling with the immeasurable. A trifling evil act done by this sort of individual is experienced in the here and now, and for the most part, barely appears for a moment. So somebody who's reflecting on this sutta, sometimes just reflecting on this helps to overcome regret. One thing is that when we reflect on this sutta, it encourages us to continue our Dhamma practice so we can overcome any kind of negative karma we might have. Of course, we don't know what kind of karma we have accumulated in this long samsara. And so this sutta emphasizes especially this importance of mind, developing our mind, and that reduces the ability of that bad karma to ripen, but also the power of our good deeds to sort of, in a sense, drown out the bad deeds. If we have a chance, we will maybe discuss the workings of karma in more detail in a future talk. So the last quote as I have today is from the commentary to the Satipatthana Sutta, and it gives 6 ways of dispelling regret. 6 ways of dispelling regret, especially for a monk, but we can adapt for lay people. Now these, I prepared the translation, so this is my own translation here. Surely these 6 qualities lead to the abandoning of uddhacca, kukucca, so remorse, you can say. The first one is broad learning, bahusuttata, questioning, paripucchata, being expert in the Vinaya, Vinaya pakatanyata, attending to elders, buddha sevita, having spiritual friends, kalyana mittata, and having beneficial discussion, sapaya kata. So this section of the commentary, it explains each of these terms. So broad learning is mentioned by mastering the meaning of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the Nikayas. Udachikukuja is abandoned. Second one, questioning, by frequent questioning of what is allowable and unallowable. So questioning about sila. 3, being expert in the Vinaya. So this is especially for monks that it means just what it sounds like. Attending to elders by staying close to spiritually mature elders. Elder monks it means here. In this case, having spiritual friends. And it gives the example of friends who have excellent mastery of the Vinaya, like Mahatera Upali, who is the foremost in Vinaya. And the sixth one is beneficial discussion. So discussion regarding what is allowable and unallowable. Again, more aimed at monks, but can be adapted to somebody who's suffering with some kind of regret, or lay people who also suffering from some kind of regret. And now this passage, these things also apply when dealing with other hindrances. We don't have time to talk about it today. They also apply when developing our good qualities. So, for example, being well learned or cross questioning, all of these appear in different contexts. So those were the main points for today. So I hope that everybody is able to overcome all of this regret and remorse, and that they're able to attain nibbana as quickly as possible. Idam me punyang
Idam me bunyan
asavakaya
asawakaya
vahang hotu.
vahang hodu.
Idam me punyang
Idam me bunyan
nibbanasa
nibbanasa
pachayo hotu.
pachayo hodu.
Mama punya bhagam
Mama punya bhagam
sambasatanam
sabasatanam
bhajimi
bhajemi
te sambe
desabe
me samang
me samam
punya bhagam
punya bhagam
labantu.
labandu. Sadhu,
Sadhu, sadhu,
sadhu,
sadhu.
sadhu.